is this a pipe dream? Are we on, looking for the unicorn in cloud cuckoo land going, oh, this is something we can change? Or do we need to recognize that you have to have some kind of gamification, I suppose, if you want to succeed?
Oh, God, no.
Welcome to How to Take the Lead, the podcast where we challenge the myths and stereotypes of what it means to be a leader today and help you to succeed in post without compromise. I'm Lee Griffith.
And I'm Carrie Ann Wade, and together we will be your guides, questioning everything we've ever learnt about leadership, sharing our experiences along the way, and inspiring you to make a real impact in your role.
Visit howtotakethelead.com for show notes, past episodes, and to join our community.
Enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome to another episode of How to Take the Lead. This is the penultimate episode of the series, can you believe? I mean, there will be a sneaky bonus, I'm sure, because that's just the way. But yeah, episode 9. Thank you to everyone who's listened and supported the series so far. We really appreciate it. Those that have joined us on YouTube, you can watch us on YouTube. Hello, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Those that have been part of the Substack community, you can still sign up and join that. We will be carrying on the conversations beyond this series. So if you want some extra bonus stuff in between our season breaks, then absolutely do get signed up. I think book club will launch soon, maybe.
Yes, very exciting.
And yeah, we'll still be on the socials and all that. I feel like I'm saying farewell. We have still got this episode and other episodes. So
what is this vibe?
How are you today, Carrie Ann?
I'm all right today. I'm all right. There is work and life stuff happening that's made me feel stressed this week, but at the same time made me reflect on what's important and where I can have impact. And it's made me think I need to start taking some of our How to Take the Lead advice about a few things. So it's been an interesting, slightly exhausting week, but I am looking forward to this conversation. And it's just made me think a lot of what we've talked about, particularly in this series of How to Take the Lead, is kind of playing itself out. And I feel like I'm ready to deal with it because we've been able to have our conversations, Lee. So that's good.
Yeah. And I feel today's conversation is probably a bit apt, and because we're talking about power and the concept of leadership. Is it all about the power? And so I suppose to kick us off, I was doing a bit of research around the concept of power and realised that actually there's far more ways that power shows itself than even I realised. So back in 1959, French and Raven did some research and identified 5 sources of power, and then that's been built on ever since. So if I just do a quick rundown of the different types of power that might be showing up in leadership. Obviously, the positional power, so your seniority. Reward power, so when you give something to someone to get a result. Expert power, so your knowledge and expertise. Referent power, so how you gain and use influence. Coercive power, so the opposite of reward, using that threat to get results. Informational power, which is different to expertise, and you've probably seen that when you've got people who might have a lot of organizational memory, for example, and really hold on to that. Connection or networked power, so the who you know, as opposed to the what you know. And I'm sure there are many others as well. So that was really interesting in and of itself, that power does show up in so many more ways than you perhaps think in the first glance. And we'll certainly get on some of my perceptions or misperceptions around power as we get into this conversation. And you do see leaders who do undoubtedly great things with their power, but you also see others who let it go to the heads, and it creates this negative and destructive culture. They go on a power trip that is literally,
Power
the
crazy,
phrase, isn't it? Power crazy, power hungry, and all of that. So I want to start today's episode to explore a little bit, Carrie Ann, around your awareness of, as you've been in leadership roles, how aware you've been of the power that you've had.
Well, what a big question to
Yeah.
start with. And it's really funny because I've reflected since we started to talk, and we did the prep this episode, thinking like, where do we want to get to with this conversation about power? And it's really helped me to reflect on a couple of things, I guess. So I guess as I've become more senior throughout my career, I've had a really high awareness of that positional power,
Mm,
and that kind of hierarchy, and the fact that I'm in a senior position and I've got the job title and I've got the accountability. And I think probably being aware of, how do I use that positional power to have an impact and to deliver things, and how do I want that to play out in my immediate team. So I think I've always probably described myself within my immediate like communications teams that I've worked with as somebody who's not particularly hierarchical. I'm there to be accountable, and I'm there to have people's backs, and I'm there to represent us. But actually, I don't really like that very linear, like
mm,
hierarchical style of leadership and management. But I guess I've also been aware that I have stepped into those more senior positions for a reason, and need to find a way to kind of use that positional power to have influence, I guess. But as we talked and I thought about this episode, there was quite a lot of areas where I thought there are either things that I'm really good at or things that I've not been so good at that I haven't really aligned or thought about from the point of view of a power dynamic.
mm,
So there are a couple of areas that you've talked about in those descriptions of power where I think, yeah, I feel like actually I have some real strength there, but I've never really considered those strengths aligned to the idea of power. So I think in terms of connection, that's something that I'm actually really good at, and that I spend a lot of time building and developing my own network, but that I also would like to think that colleagues and others would say about me that I'm quite good at connecting other people up and helping
mm,
them to think about their network and how they can have. For me, it's always been about like how can they have greater influence and impact through building those connections. Like if I put those two people together to have a conversation, like what's the positive that's going to come out of
mm,
that? And I guess now we've been talking, I see that that is about power, isn't it? Like, what's the power in bringing those people together, hopefully in a positive way? And I guess the other bit is around that kind of influence piece and feedback. Like, I feel like some of my natural skills and preferences are about trying to influence, facilitate, mediate, build relationships, uh, surface things in discussions in a way that helps people feel like they can have those conversations and start to think about that influence. So there was definitely
mm,
things for me that I'm like, oh, I hadn't considered that from the point of view of power, but there are areas that you've mentioned that feel like they fit with kind of my style of leadership. But
mm,
there were also times when I reflected on the fact that there are things I haven't stepped into enough. So you talked about expert power, for example, and I feel like I hear this a lot about my profession actually through the mentoring that I do and through my own kind of professional background and working with communicators, that often there's this sense that um, we're not stepping into our expertise enough, or our
mm,
expertise is not valued. And actually, what I hadn't thought about was how that diminishes the sort of power balance in relationships by not owning it and stepping into that expert space, and, being able to say, no, my expert professional opinion is this because I've got years of experience and knowledge and skills. So it brought up loads for me actually that I could probably waffle on about for ages, but I found it really interesting to reflect on those different types of power, and kind of
mm.
how that's played out for me in my leadership career. So I'm keen to know more from you as well.
Yeah, well, before we move on to me,
It's
I
not all
definitely
about
won't.
you, but
Yeah,
before.
I definitely won't be as eloquent as you or considered as you. But I'm interested in, I suppose maybe the signs that maybe has highlighted to you the extent of your power. So you've picked up on the things that you've reflected on and the actions that you take. But are there things that on reflection that the behaviours or signals from other people that's indicated you have a power that you weren't aware of?
Do you know, it's probably been more recent, but actually having some really frank, straightforward feedback about some of those things have really
Mm,
highlighted it. And having people say, did you know that you do this and I really admire the way that you do that because I've never felt able to, and it has this impact in a space. So actually I've been lucky enough that a few people have bothered to give me that feedback, and that has been positive stuff that I'm talking about, and kind of gone, oh, I've noticed that when you operate in board discussions, for example, that you are really skillful at doing this, and did you realize, because the impact it has is that it brings people back to the pertinent point that we need to take some action on, for example. And I guess that's helped me to reflect on whether I've honed that skill, whether it's nature versus nurture or whatever. And it's been helpful to have people reflect that, because it does kind of highlight to you, I am having a level of influence, or I'm exerting a level of power
Mm.
to kind of get to a decision or take an action that perhaps I wasn't quite so aware of myself. I think there probably have been times in my career where I reflect on the positional power piece, actually, where maybe my desire to not be so hierarchical and
Mhm.
not exert those positions of power have almost led to a bit of inertia or a bit of like non-action,
Okay.
because I think my style hasn't been about empowering people and giving people autonomy, and wanting people to aspire to certain things or operate in a certain way, but almost come to that conclusion for themselves.
Mm.
And actually, what I've had to learn through my career is that there are just some people, I would say, that actually respond better to being told what to do than being
Mm.
given that free rein. And because that hasn't been my natural style of leadership, to exert that positional power and be like, no, I'm the boss. I would never say it like this, but I'm the boss and this is what needs to happen. And I need you to do X, Y, and Z. Because often I haven't always felt comfortable in that space and
Mm.
operate in that way. I've probably done a bit of a disservice to those people who need that level of kind of direction and that level of being told, these are exactly the things I need you to deliver. And some people do operate better in that space, I think. And I think COVID was a really good example of when everyone was working towards a common goal and there was a command and control structure. As much as that was a challenge for some of us in my sector to operate in that way, other people really shone because it was just
Mm.
really clear, like, these are the actions I need to take. This is the end result I need to get to, you know, that really directive way of working, which I think sometimes has challenged my natural style of leadership. And I probably have, yeah, not been as aware until it's too late that I maybe
Yeah.
haven't helped people to deliver what they could deliver through not being so directive, if that makes sense. I feel
Mm.
like I've waffled a bit there.
No, no, it's an interesting one, and hierarchical positional powers, I think, been the one I've probably been most aware of, but also I've been the most uncomfortable with, and it's been a really interesting reflection point for me because I've always been ambitious. I've always wanted to be at the top of my game and achieve the ultimate kind of position that I can within my area, within my kind of profession, and did that. So there was obviously something within me that wanted positional power, although I didn't couch it like that. I wanted to be the ultimate expert. Um, but I hated using my title. I didn't really like reflecting other people's authority either. I would purposely not use people's titles if they said, "Oh, I'm Doctor this, Mister that, or whatever," working in a health setting. I refused to. I would just call them Bob, Dave, Jill, whatever. Well, obviously, if that was their name, I didn't just
To
randomly.
randomly calling people Bob.
But I had this thing around, "Well, you're no better than me. You've done a different education. You've got a different role,
Mm,
but I'm not going to put you up on a pedestal by using this name." And I hated that power play that would go on in
mm,
clinical situation. But my reflection now is maybe I was actively trying to undermine their power, and maybe that was being disrespectful in and of itself. So that's been an interesting one. And then my other thing around, I was undermining myself because I used to do well, there's no point me saying what my job title is because no one's going to really understand what that job does. And to some extent, I still agree with that. And I say that when I work with a lot of leaders who focus so much on their job title. So, what does it mean to anyone? What does that, we all have these grand titles that it doesn't actually say what you do and
Mm.
doesn't mean anything. If you're having to go into a whole explanation around what your job is to your nan or to someone down the pub, you might as well
Yeah.
just lead with that to begin with. Like, let's get rid of the title. But yeah, so that's been an interesting reflection around the undermining part of it.
Yeah, and it is funny, isn't it? Because I guess it's that level of comfort, isn't it? Because as you were saying, I was like, oh yeah, I can definitely remember times, even like recently, where I cringe at having to say that I'm a director, and then there's a bit of
Mm,
me, that's crossed at myself because I'm like, but I've worked really hard to get to this
yeah,
point in my
yeah,
career, so why am I cringing about it? And actually, I'm wanting to role model to other communicators that they can step into that leadership space. So if I'm not comfortable to own it for myself, like what does that say? But yeah, I think it comes with a lot of complexities, doesn't it? About the cultures we've worked within, the teams we've worked within, our own experiences, about how comfortable we are then stepping into that space and that conversation about power. And I don't know if it's the word power that makes
mm,
it
mm,
feel cringy. Because when I thought about influence and expertise and connection, I felt really comfortable with
yeah,
those
yeah,
concepts that are still about power. But then when it
yeah,
was power, I was like, oh no, it feels a bit icky.
yeah. So, do you think you can successfully lead if you don't have power? Now, obviously, if you're in a senior management position, you have positional power, which we've already
Yeah.
referenced. But can you perhaps be a positive and transformational leader with just your position, or do you need a blend of those other powers to be in play in order to truly succeed?
I thought about this and I absolutely am of the opinion that you need that blend, I think,
Mm,
because we can probably all either name people we've seen in like high profile public positions, or we can think about our own experiences of leaders that we've worked with, where just because they have a senior position, just because they are a senior leader in an organization, it hasn't meant that they have actually had any sort of positive impact as a
yeah,
leader.
yeah,
So I don't think that just through having the title and having that hierarchy and that positional power, you can be an effective and impactful leader, because I think so much of what we've talked about through how to take the lead and in other conversations has been about your ability to influence, your ability to connect with people and build trust, for example. So
mm,
I bet
mm,
we've all got examples of people who have the positional power. And you talked about being power crazy and going on a power trip, and who've maybe used that power to bully or be, you mentioned coercion, didn't you? Like
mm, mm,
coerce people into things because they're the boss. So you must do this because I've told you to, because I'm the boss. And actually, when that goes unquestioned, I I think that person might think that they are exerting their power and that they're having an impact. But fundamentally, I think what it does is break trust and
yeah,
alienate people. And people get into a mindset where they're either like, well, I'm just going to do it, but I don't actually really care that much about it, but I just need to get the boss off my back, or
mm,
I need
mm.
do you know what I mean? So I feel like just using positional power can create really negative impacts and scenarios, and a really challenging culture. So I think to be impactful and have that positive impact, you need to have a blend of all of those other things. And I think you can have a blend of all of those other things and be perceived as and have impact as a leader without always having the position of power in the hierarchy.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, sorry, I'm kind of going all over the place with my ramblings, but my answer was I think you need the blend of everything, and it isn't just about positional power to be able to lead well.
No, almost if you were to remove any kind of power, the positional one could be the one most easily
Yeah.
removed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. And I suppose the skill of a leader is recognizing the powers that they have more broadly than just that hierarchical one, and then how they use them. So if you look at some of those powers I talked about at the very beginning, the most effective ones probably are, as you've said, like influence, your knowledge, your expertise, how networked you are. Whereas the least effective one from a leadership perspective are things like coercive
Mm,
power,
mm,
because that fear, leading by fear, leading through punishment. probably isn't going to get results. It might get a short-term
Yeah.
fix. And we see that with some leaders where they come in, they might do a turnaround and they put the fear of God in everyone. And something might happen, but that's not a sustainable way to lead.
Mm.
And then you see all the other metrics start to fall as the culture erodes, as trust erodes and all of that. And then you see morale falls, performance falls. And we talked about that in the communications episode previously. So the metrics that can fly if you use the wrong kind of power in the wrong setting. So I suppose as a leader, you need to have, and we talk about this word a lot, clarity
Mhm.
in what you're trying to achieve, who your stakeholders are, what your core values are, and your beliefs around that as well. And then use the values, the powers rather, that feel most aligned to
Yeah.
achieve that.
Yeah.
That's kind of would be my sense. What if you feel powerless? So, there are situations where you feel something's out of your control and maybe it's undermining your ability to lead. How do you tackle that?
Oh, I think that's a really challenging one, isn't it? Because so much of it is dependent on, I guess, the culture in your organization where I don't know. There's something for me that God, there's so much in this. There's something for me that is partly about is it just you that feels powerless? So
Mm,
actually, dependent on what that situation is that's making you feel like you don't have any power, can you recognise that that is individual to you and therefore something that you might need to identify? Like, how can you regain that power? Is that possible? Does it need to be possible? Is there a different
mm,
way that
mm,
you can reframe what that situation is to your benefit, and to help you achieve your specific purpose? And we've talked lots in other episodes, haven't we, about like alignment and actually, is it a sign that things are not aligned and maybe this is not the right environment for you to thrive as a leader or have that positive impact that you want to? But also, if trying to evaluate whether or not actually there's more of you that feel powerless, and what's that all about? And actually, if
mm,
collectively there was an opportunity for you to come together and maybe use your collective voice to perhaps challenge something that's happening in your organization, or a leader who is leading by fear or coerciveness or whatever it might be, that is there a strength in numbers? And actually, is there an opportunity in that space for you to think about how that style or approach of one leader is impacting on a group of you,
mm,
and move it away maybe a bit from that emotional element of how that's making people feel, but to focus it on the performance. So it's almost like, if organisationally we're striving to achieve X, the way in which this leader is impacting on a group of us means that we're never going to achieve that. So how can we have a conversation about what might need to change from a leadership point of view to enable us to deliver what the organisation needs from us? But I mean, all of that sounds like I'm being really flippant, because none of that is easy to do.
no.
But I think it's about having that awareness and that ability to be able to identify what those issues are, and where there may be opportunities to take action either individually or as a collective to try and address some of those problems.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, and it almost builds on some of the points we talked about in the difficult conversation episode around how you perhaps take some of that emotion you might be feeling out of the situation to be able to tackle it. And also, sometimes it is about bringing awareness to an individual when they might not be aware that they're making you feel powerless,
Mm.
and then just identifying through evidence based, not that emotion, um, of how you feel disempowered to be able to do your role could actually be a really positive step. Obviously, if it is something that is more toxic and more challenging than that, then there might be no use in you trying to tackle it with that individual head on. That then there are, well, what are your other recourse of actions? Is it something you, as you said, collectively you do as a group? Is it often in organisations there are individuals you can go and raise concerns with if you think that there is an actual harm being done
Mm.
by this person that's taking power away from others. There are external ways and means that you can bring light to a situation as well. But I think that's where your support network comes in really what's the word I'm looking for? Really helpfully handling.
It's really important. That's where your support
yeah,
network's really important.
that's the word. So in my exploration of power and leadership, and as I've already alluded to, I definitely have come to it, I suppose, in quite a negative space. And we will cover this because it is important, but I'll get to that in a minute. We've talked about it being a dirty word and feeling a bit icky, and we conversely recognise that power exists in all sorts of ways. Obviously, it's influenced by the privilege that you have, by the voice that you have. So even those people who say they don't care for or want power, or those who perhaps advocate on behalf of others who have less power, there's a reality, isn't there, about there is still power in play in all of those situations, regardless of how you're trying to position your own power. So if you're someone that is uncomfortable with the concept of power and the power that you have, how do you start to get comfortable with the power that you have as a leader, and I suppose harness that to use it for good?
I think for me, it's about purpose and impact. So if you're uncomfortable with I think we need to get to a space where we have to accept that power is a thing. It's a concept. It's an actual thing that is happening all around us. So we either have power or we don't in different circumstances. And I guess it's about acknowledging and accepting that. But if you're uncomfortable as a leader with the notion of power or the term power, because it feels like that dirty word that's like got that negative kind of connotation about it, I think it's about reframing that. So actually what you are considering is, what is your purpose as a leader? And you mentioned clarity, getting that clarity on that. And what impact is it that you want to have and that you feel you can have because of the position that you find yourself in? So for me, I guess I feel quite uncomfortable with the terminology around power because that doesn't feel like it fits with my values and the language that I like to use. So I guess for me, I think about, as a leader, what's the influence and impact that I can have, and where am I in a privileged position where I can actually, I already have a seat at the table as part of those conversations, for example, or I am in a position where my role enables me to be somewhere that means I can challenge bad behaviours or people's assumptions about the way certain things might land in an organisation or the impact it might have on other people. And where do I need to identify and recognise where I could advocate for other people if that's what they would like me to do. So I think it's something about getting that balance, because sometimes I think you can assume you should be the voice for the people who don't have as much power or influence or impact as you. Actually, that's not always the right thing to do. But actually then it's about, okay, how do I create the space for those people to have their own voice and influence and impact? So I think it's about recognizing that power is there, that you might feel uncomfortable with it because we've always probably looked at power from that point of view of it being more challenging and more negative, because we talked about being power mad, power crazy. But we wouldn't say things with those negative connotations about wanting to be impactful as a leader, would we? We'd see that as a positive thing. So I think for me, it's almost about that reframe. Reframing that notion of power in your head about what does that mean for you as a leader in delivering your purpose and engaging with other people to help deliver that bigger purpose for your organisation.
Yeah, and you're completely right. Reframe is the word that came to my mind, because power doesn't mean control, and often that's what we kind of join them two together. But it does mean impact. So that reframe is important. And we talked in episode 5 around using your voice for good. That is you using your power, albeit not in a oh, look at me kind of way. Here's my shoulder pad. Let's get on with it. I don't know why I had to do the action whilst I was talking.
That's for the YouTube viewers.
Yeah. And there's something we've talked about this often around if you overuse your strengths, it becomes a weakness. And it's the same thing around bringing awareness to your power. If you overuse your power, it can become a force not for good. Not sure that's the sentence I want to say, but I can't think of a better one.
We know what you meant. We know what you meant.
So it's all about your self-awareness, isn't it? And reframing in a way that feels comfortable, but I don't want people to feel too comfortable, because there's got to be a bit of grit and challenge there as well for you to truly step into the space and own it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I love that grit and challenge. Absolutely. Yeah. I like that.
So I've referenced a couple of times now my negative view of the word power. And I would say that's been true until even quite recently. And I suppose that's because I see time and time again the destruction that power can cause. So I do want to briefly tackle those who do abuse the power that they have. And I've seen it in organisations I've worked for. I've seen it in wider sectors that I've been in. We obviously see it in the news and the media, and played out in social media, for example. Leaders who use their position of power to silence other people, leaders who bully and intimidate people beneath them to achieve an outcome, leaders who favour and reward those who do and say the right things. And I know, as you do, that it happens a lot more than it is ever called out for. And I can only assume it's not called out as much as it should be because of the power dynamics. And we've spoken before about that knock-on effect that it has on people. And there's a negative influence, isn't there? People feeling like they've got to behave in the same way to succeed. I've seen people moan about, this person or that person, and then they've gone and blown smoke up their ass when they're around them to get promotion or to get what they want from their portfolio, or, to get favoured in some way. And the cycle continues forever. And I suppose that we talk about grit and challenge, that's there in me. That fire is there because we talk about this being the year of change. Certainly from our perspective, we've labelled it that. But is it, is this a pipe dream? Are we on, looking for the unicorn in cloud cuckoo land going, oh, this is something we can change? Or do we need to recognise that you have to have some kind of gamification, I suppose, if you want to succeed?
Oh, God, no. There's so much of me that wants to be really hopeful and say, yes, it's all out there for the taking. We can change this. We can absolutely, really challenge those negative power dynamics that come into play. So I want to say yes, and I want to be part of that change 100% for sure. But I think it's so nuanced, isn't it? Because for some individuals, it will depend what success looks like for them. So if success for an individual looks like getting to the highest possible positional power that they can with the best paycheck and, whatever it is that's driving that person, then actually there probably is an element of gamification in it, because you are probably going to find yourselves, if you are that person, doing exactly what you said, which is, even if some of it feels uncomfortable for you and you don't like the way the power dynamics are playing out, you still play into them, because individually for you, it's going to get you to where you want to be in your career. For other people, there might be more at play there, because it might be more about their professional and personal integrity, their morals, their values, which means they're not going to get into that kind of, I'm just going to play the game to get the big job, because actually that's not what is their individual driver and not what feels important to them. And I think so much of this challenge is about individuals rather than about a collective, if I'm honest, because it's about people either feeling like, I want to speak out because I don't feel like what's going on here is right, or it's about people going, I won't speak out because I just want to pay the mortgage, so I'll be complicit through not doing anything. Or it will be the opposite, which is, I'm going to play into all of those negative stereotypes and play this power game and be part of that crazy power trip because I want my next promotion. So it's really challenging to kind of work out how we make that culture shift. And I think the thing that I have found more and more upsetting, I guess, as I've moved through my career and been in that leadership space, is actually when I see people challenge and call out the poor use of power, more often than not, and I mean very much more often than not, what happens is the person who's prepared to make that challenge and say, this doesn't feel right, this doesn't sit comfortably with me, we're not doing the right thing here, often ends up being the person that leaves that organization,
Yeah,
either
absolutely.
because they are pushed out because their face doesn't fit and they haven't said the right thing. They haven't said the right thing, or because they realize that the culture in that organization and the toxicity that's playing through just isn't healthy or right for them, and that they're never
Yeah.
going to feel like they can influence and have impact in that space. And I feel like that's where I feel slightly worried and depressed about how we create this movement of change, because the people who are in organizations sometimes who really want to make that change happen for various different reasons don't stay there to help make it
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah. You see this. There are really good people stepping away from um, positions of power and influence because it's not worth it. And it's almost like, are there more of the wrong uns, as it were, that are rising to the top? Is proportionately, have we got it so out of sync that it's, we talk about that Malcolm Gladwell book with the tipping point. Is the tipping point such that there are so few of those that are willing to do the fight and to use their power to make this change happen? Are they just getting shouted out or overshadowed or undermined and all of those things, or just personally don't have the energy to kind of continue fighting, which is not a bad thing.
Mm.
Um, yeah, it's a hard one to know if it will change, and that feels a bit depressing to me.
I know. I feel sad. I feel like I might cry a little bit. And then there's a bit of me that goes, how do we harness all of those amazing leaders who've been in that position where they're like, no, my integrity is telling me this is wrong. I've spoken out and now I can't stay, either because my position's too untenable, I'm being pushed out, or quite frankly, I can't cope with this toxic nature. How do we get all of those people in one space and start creating some new organization and some new leadership approaches that harnesses all of that good? Because
Yeah.
I do think it's there. And I think probably some, even my own self, and I think I've mentioned this in examples before on the podcast, I've even found myself in some situations earlier on in my leadership journey, rather than speaking out, just not saying anything because that
Yeah.
feels easier, and that makes it not that it puts me in a more comfortable position, but it's just like, head down. I don't want to get
Mm,
involved in the politics of these
mm,
power dynamics that are playing out. But on reflection, I look back at that and think, well, that makes me complicit because I haven't challenged it. And I
mm,
imagine there's probably quite a swell of people who are in that position where they're not blowing smoke up people's asses and just trying to get the next promotion by going along with the bad behaviours and bad power
mm,
dynamic,
mm,
but they're equally not challenging it. They're just sitting somewhere quietly in the middle. And I just wonder how
mm.
many people are finding themselves in that space as leaders.
It's it. The other thing that I'm struggling with is this sense of there's more um, discussion and debate and awareness around good leadership qualities and what you need, and values-led leadership and all the stuff that we talk about. We're not necessarily the first to raise some of these things as
Mm.
being good for leadership. So they can almost become buzzwords that people use. And in the last fortnight, there's been another list of top chief executives that have been published for a sector. And, some of the criteria when I was looking at it was, oh, they're demonstrating values-led leadership, blah, blah, blah. Now, I've looked down that list, and I'm not saying this categorically for everyone on their list. I'm sure there's some really great leaders that have been nominated, but there are leaders there who, to the external world, have been chosen because they are seen to be good, great leaders. Yeah, I know internally that they're not, that there's stuff going on, that they're playing all the power play dynamic, blah, blah, blah. I know people who um, were part of the decision making panels to decide the ratings also don't live by the values of which they were judging. And so it's just perpetuating this kind of everyone's playing the game.
Yeah. Oh my God, I feel so depressed.
Sorry, this is not. Well, I feel like we've got to kind of get to a.
But it's that calling it out, isn't it? How do you
Mm,
call that out? How do you how do you change the rules of the game? That's what we're talking
mm,
about here, isn't it? How
mm,
do you change the rules of the game so it doesn't become about rewarding the bad behaviors and playing into all of those negative power dynamics, but it becomes about more of the positives that we've talked around, about stepping into some of those other types of power for the greater good and to have a positive impact and influence for other
mm.
people. It's
But
hard. It's
that
really
goes back to
hard.
some of the conversation. It is. It goes back to some of the earlier conversations that we had, probably at the very beginning of starting the podcast, when we were talking about what do organisations need to do differently, looking at their recruitment processes. How are they really testing um, the values and the behaviours, and looking at skills more than just their expertise and their knowledge, but actually the broader
Mm.
skills that a good leader needs to have. It's about how organisations are supporting leaders and the right kinds of leaders, and not doing the usual tick box exercises when it comes to things like diversity and inclusion and training programs and all of those types of things that need to happen, but it just feels so slow.
It does feel slow, doesn't it? But then I guess we are talking about a cultural shift in
Yeah.
leadership, aren't we? So not even in one organization, but in leadership as this great collective up here. And we know it takes time. So I don't know what the research say, if it's the latest research, but it takes like 7 years to change the culture in one organization. So
Mm.
actually we have to start somewhere. We have to hold on to the positives that are happening. We have to try and find ways to harness and nurture and support those leaders who demonstrate the values that we think are really important, and just, I guess, keep trying to plug away at that, because if we give up, then we're complicit again in this
Yeah.
horrible dynamic of poor
Yeah.
leadership that's all about the wrong sort of power.
So I feel like we've not resolved this one, and we're
We're
going
going
to
to come
need
back to
to
this, aren't we?
revisit, and we would absolutely love people who are listening to this to share their views and thoughts and ideas for what can be the different this time round, I suppose. But to wrap up in our how do you really start to leverage your power? What should leaders and I suppose organisations be learning through maybe the discussion that we've had to support the right kind of powers to be put into play?
So I feel like, firstly, for me, it's about doing that reframe. So if you're not comfortable with the concept of power, finding a way to get comfortable with it, because whether you like it or not, as we've said, there you're going to have various different levels and elements
Mm,
of power, whatever they might look like. So if you need to reframe that and think about it in a different way, so whether that's about impact, influence, whatever, maybe start to do some of that thinking. And then I think for leaders, it's about understanding where you actually do have the most power right now,
mm,
how that's playing out, how you are evidencing that, like what impact that's having on others, and starting to understand that impact. So, actually, if you harnessed all of that for good, what would that look like? But also identifying maybe where you don't have as much power as perhaps you might need to deliver on your purpose and to have that positive impact. Because if you can identify some of that space, so maybe I've said sometimes I've not stepped into my expert power. I've not done that. So actually, if I've identified that, what action can I take to do more of that
mm,
to
mm.
help me to achieve my purpose and goals? So I think it's about that identification and understanding of where you're at in some of those power, what are we calling them? Like categories, I guess, and kind of
Yeah.
where you can do more of the good stuff that's having a positive impact, and where you can see that there are gaps that you might need to build on. Probably feels like some good first steps for me.
Yeah. I love that. And from me, in terms of the learning that leaders, I suppose, can take from this conversation, it isn't so much about deciding what power you fit into, but maybe it's about focusing more on the types of relationships that you're building, being aware of your kind of personal agenda so that you're not abusing the power that you've got. Things like working on those broader skills like your communications and your connection, which again these are all power-based things, but it's about that reframe of how you use it. And then looking at, how you use your power, whatever that might be, for good in some way. We talked about it in other episodes, but there's that concept of how are you lifting as you rise as a leader, which I love. And I think that's something that we can all do regardless of where we are in an organisation.
That feels like a more positive way to end the episode, Lee. Lifting as we rise. I don't think there's anybody really who wouldn't want to get behind that, is there? Well, maybe there is.
Yeah.
Maybe some of those power hungry leaders won't, but I feel like that's what we're all about. So that's it. That's a more positive end. But as you said, I don't think we've reached a resolution or a solution. And I'm sure it will
No.
be a topic we come back to in many different shapes and forms as we continue our How to Take the Lead discussion.
Yeah. So that's it. That's the end of the episode. If you like this, please leave a rating or a review. I still can't say it. It's been 3 series. Get involved in the conversations over on Substack. Like, follow, share, all of that stuff would be brilliant. And come and DM us with your stories of power being used for good and bad. We would love to know. Don't feel like you've got to share it to the world if you're not comfortable yet. But if we can help be a mouthpiece for you, we will happily do so. So until next time.
Thanks for listening to today's episode.
Don't forget to hit follow and share the show with someone you know. Oh, that rhymes.
A rating or review will be much appreciated.
If you're looking for some leadership inspiration, why not get a free copy of our recommended reading list? Visit howtotakethelead.com to download.
Until next week, get out there and take the lead.